Okay, rightio, 3:30 in the afternoon, final stretch. We're going to talk about the economy. I hope you're all excited. I'll do my best not to bore you out of your skulls, because it doesn't have to be a boring topic. It can be interesting, so I hope you get a few takeaways out of this presentation today. So, success and a few more cuts. We've pinched the theme of the conference and we've changed it a little bit. And a few more cuts. I'll give you the tip now. What I'm talking about is rate cuts from the RBA, and we'll get into why we think that might be the case. But before we do, most important slide in the deck is always this one here. You might have seen a few of these before. I'm from a bank, so banks, we like these slides, our disclaimers. Everything you hear from me today, general in nature, for information purposes only, is not financial advice. So please don't take this as financial advice. And receive advice appropriate to your own circumstances. So, that having been said, if we're going to look forward in terms of the economy, it might be best, first of all, to take a little bit of a look in the rearview mirror and just talk about where we've come from. And over the last 3 or 4 years, since 2021, no surprise to anyone in the room, one major challenge facing the economy, and that's inflation. Inflation that was too high, the highest that we've had in 30 years. The inflation rate peaked at 7.8% in the December quarter of 2022, but it was really in late 2021 that the inflation rate really started to take off. And why is that? Well, in simple terms, we had an economy where there was more demand than what there was supply. There were more buyers for goods and services than what there was supply of goods and services being produced. And the reason for that has everything to do with COVID-19 and Russia's war on Ukraine. So we had a series of economic shocks. Shock to the supply side of the economy with COVID-19. So if you think about what happened during that time, we closed the international borders, we closed state borders, we shut down lots of different businesses. So all of a sudden, almost overnight, we were producing drastically fewer goods and services in the Australian economy. And at the same time, we had the government and the central bank stepping in to try to support industry and try to support households. And we did things like the introduction of JobKeeper, the doubling of the job seeker payment, lots of payments from various state and local governments to try to keep the economy ticking along. So think of that as the supply side of the economy taking a big hit overnight. But the demand side of the economy, supported by governments and a central bank cutting interest rates pretty close to zero, is staying up here. It's staying well supported. So supply and demand out of balance, more buyers than sellers. What happens? Prices go up. If you've got scarcity, we need to ration those scarce goods and services through the price mechanism, so you get higher prices. And that's exactly what we saw. Now, the problem was compounded in early 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. More supply shocks, particularly to energy, fertilisers, grains, all of those sorts of things which are key inputs to production. They all became more expensive. And to some degree, Australia was a beneficiary of that because many of the things that we sell to the rest of the world, the prices went up for those things. So it helped Australia nationally, but as an industry, it would have really stung at that point when we're seeing higher prices for some of these key inputs. So again, demand up here, supply down here, prices go up. So that's been the challenge, inflation being way too high since, I guess, the second half of 2021. And now, as policymakers, both the central bank, the Reserve Bank of Australia, and also the government have tried to address this problem. They're effectively trying to bring inflation back down without doing so good a job that it tips the economy into a recession. So something that we hear central bankers particularly talk about quite a lot is this idea of the narrow path. You might have read this in the newspaper or heard it on the news maybe. They like to talk about the narrow path. Are we on the narrow path? Are we not on the narrow path? And effectively what this means is this is the idea that if you don't raise interest rates enough, then inflation stays high. The value of people's wages and savings is destroyed, becomes harder for businesses to budget. You get business insolvencies and misery ensues. So that's one mistake you can make. You can not raise rates enough to get inflation under control. The second mistake that you can make is that you can raise interest rates too much. And this is the sort of policy error that would tip the economy into recession. So when we have a recession, the economy shrinks, the unemployment rate typically surges, you get lots of business insolvencies, and general misery ensues. So two bad options. We're trying to thread the needle between the two. That's what the Reserve Bank has been doing. So far, so good. No recession yet in Australia. So if we look at the inflation rate today, there's some positive signs, because you'll notice on my graph I've got three different measures of inflation here. Don't worry too much about what each one of them means. They're just three different ways to measure it. And I've also got two horizontal red dotted lines on my graph as well. That's the target. That's what we're aiming for. And ideally, we want to get inflation back to the midpoint of this target. So 2.5% growth in prices year over year is the target. Now, where we are today is pretty close to target. Depending on which measure you use, we're either at or slightly above the target. So getting pretty close. That doesn't mean that prices are coming down. It means that the growth rate in prices has slowed down. So we're not going to see lower prices necessarily. We're just going to see prices rising more slowly. So inflation is now effectively at the target. And because inflation has come back down and is pretty close to target, or is at the target, all of a sudden we've seen a rate cut from the Reserve Bank of Australia. So in February of this year, the RBA, they cut interest rates for the first time by 0.25 percentage points down to 4.10%. So that was nice to see. Unfortunately, at that meeting, they did try to caution us a little bit to not expect further interest rate cuts to come in quick succession. So there was a lot of emphasis on we're cautious about the outlook for further interest rate cuts. The governor of the central bank, Michelle Bullock, she said that she wasn't confident that we would see as many cuts as what the financial markets had priced in. The markets were expecting 4 rate cuts in total in 2025 and early 2026. So she kind of poured a little bit of cold water on that idea and said that maybe that was a little bit too optimistic. 4 might be too much. So that was interesting. Now, to give you a little bit of an idea about what we think about the situation, we're still expecting 2 more cuts from the Reserve Bank this year. So we think that they're going to be cutting in May, and we think that they're going to be cutting in August. And that would take the cash rate down to 3.60%. And then after that, we think they're done for a period of time. So why do we think they're going to be cutting further? Well, inflation is already at the target. We just had a look at that. So if inflation has come back down to target, we no longer have an inflation problem, at least not to the same degree as what we previously did. There is no need to hold interest rates as restrictive as what we have had them over the last year and a half. If we look at some forward indicators about where inflation might be headed in the months and quarters ahead, that looks reasonably positive as well. So one thing that the Reserve Bank looks at is inflation expectations. They go out and they talk to people on the street and they ask them, what do you think prices are going to look like in a year's time? And if you say that prices are going to be high, they probably will be, is the thinking of the Reserve Bank. So this is the idea of expectations become reality. If you think prices are going to be high, you'll change your behaviour. So me, as an employee, if I think prices are going to be much higher next year, when I go and have my annual wage review with my boss, what am I going to do? I'm going to ask for a bigger wage increase. And if I've got a larger wage increase, I've got more ability to spend, I've got more ability to go out there and add to demand in the economy, And if we think back to my first slide, the whole reason why we've had inflation is because total demand is exceeding total supply. So stronger demand in the economy raises risk of further inflation. Similarly, for businesses, if you think that you're going to be facing quite strong price pressures in the future, and you've got pricing power, i.e. you can actually set your own prices to some degree, and cognizant that many primary industries are not in that position, then you're going to set your prices higher. And if you're setting your prices higher, consumer pays more, that's inflation. So this is why the Reserve Bank cares about inflation expectations. They have a way of becoming self-fulfilling. Something else that we noticed in the most recent inflation data is that firm pricing behaviour has changed. And one that I picked out quite specifically was what's happening in the construction industry. New home purchase costs in the final quarter of last year actually fell. So not just prices growing more slowly, but prices actually falling. And that kind of tells us that some of these inflationary pressures in building materials have dissipated somewhat. So that's been a big pain point for inflation in the economy. And it also tells us that all of a sudden, there's not enough demand out there for new houses for those construction companies to pass on higher costs. So if we're seeing discounting happening, it tells us something about the balance of supply and demand in the economy. So that's a little bit of a signal. Now, why was the Reserve Bank cautious about the outlook for further cuts if we're seeing these encouraging forward indicators and we're seeing inflation pretty close to the target? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that we've got very low productivity growth here in Australia. Pretty much our productivity today is around about the same as what it was in 2019. So how many outputs do we generate with a given number of inputs? That's what productivity is. So that's bad. If you're less productive, there's more inflationary pressure in the economy. And another thing that they've been concerned about is the state of the labour market. We've got an incredibly strong labour market in Australia, and I'm sure that there would be people in this room who are still finding it difficult to find workers. And maybe when you do manage to find workers, they don't necessarily have the skill set that you want, and maybe you have to pay up a little bit more for them because businesses are having to compete with each other to attract scarce labour. So workers have a lot of bargaining power because there's not enough workers to go around, and that pushes up wage rates, and that can push up demand, which pushes up inflation. So this is something that the Reserve Bank has been concerned about. Nevertheless, we still think 2 more rate cuts this year, and our forecast is a rate cut in May, followed by a rate cut in August to take the cash rate down to 3.6%. So, soft landing secured, we think. Inflation coming back to target, 2.5% inflation, and the economy avoiding recession. So far, so good. So that's the situation as we see it, but the economy is facing some more shocks all of a sudden. More shocks coming from offshore, and they've got a lot to do with this fella here, or at least he's kind of the torchbearer of it, Donald Trump. And we're seeing more supply side shocks, more shocks on the trade side of things. And perhaps just to explain what we think is going on, I'm going to tempt fate a little bit, and I know that a few speakers earlier today have talked about the dangers of quoting ancient Greece and Rome, but we're going to do it anyway. And I'm going to explain what's happening with the USA and their changed approach to trade via this idea here, the Thucydides trap. So Thucydides is a guy who wrote a book, the history of the Peloponnesian War, history of the war between Sparta and Athens. And in that book, there's a line where he says, it was the rise of Athens and the fear that this instilled in Sparta that made war inevitable. And there's an academic in the United States called Graham Allison, and he's taken this line and he's created this idea, the Thucydides trap, and using that to explain the relationship between the United States and China. So we have an established power, the USA, which was king of the jungle after the Cold War, undisputed, and they were willing to bear costs for the rest of the world economy. So they were willing to bear costs of free trade and also to provide protection to the rest of the world. So the US military has underwritten free trade and kept trade routes open for everyone else. So we've been beneficiaries of that. All of a sudden, the United States faces a challenger in China. So another economy has popped up, doesn't share the same values as the USA, doesn't think the same way as the USA, has an economy that is rapidly approaching the size of the USA's and a military that is modernising quite rapidly as well. Suddenly, the United States is worried about this, and they've responded to the rise of China by starting to behave more like China. So the USA is starting to fight fire with fire. So China has been a beneficiary of free trade, but they haven't always practiced free trade. Accessing the Chinese market can be notoriously difficult. So all of a sudden, the USA is mirroring Chinese trade and economic practices back to China and also to the rest of us in other parts of the world. So I'll leave you with this key point here. This is one to remember. Dealing with America is starting to look more and more like dealing with China. And for us here in Australia, we can take a little bit of comfort from the fact that we have a lot of experience in dealing with China. And a lot of experience in dealing with China when it's been difficult to trade with China. So not that long ago, we upset China when we suggested that there should be an investigation into the origins of COVID-19, and then China placed restrictions on a lot of our trade. So beef, cotton, barley, rock lobster, wine, coal, various other commodities were all of a sudden very difficult to sell into China. Now, Australia's response to that was effectively to do nothing. And that served us very well. Industry managed to find new markets in most cases. Difficult to do that for wine and rock lobster, premium products. No other natural buyers for those products. But for everything else, we managed to find new markets to sell into, and we diversified our trade. We came away with more buyers, and the loser of that trade war was probably China. And we've now seen all of these trade restrictions rolled back. So in some ways, the person who wins a trade war is the one who doesn't participate. If I shoot myself in the foot economically, the absolute worst thing you can do in retaliation is to shoot yourself in the foot. It doesn't make any sense at all. So that's what China did. And we're starting to see that America is behaving more like China when it comes to trade. So Uncle Sam would like to sell to you, but he doesn't want to buy from you unless he has to. This feels very Chinese. They like to sell to you. They don't really want to buy from you unless they have to. They would prefer to be self-sufficient. They would prefer to have local provision. And also in the United States, which is another very Chinese idea, the focus has now shifted from consumption back towards production. We're going to make America great again. What does that mean? We're going to make things in America again. It's going to be more like the 1950s and the 1960s with a strong manufacturing base. So the American economy today is more than 60% consumption-based. So their economy is people going out there and buying stuff. The Chinese economy is heavily production-based. They manufacture stuff and they sell it into the largest consumer market in the world, the United States. All of a sudden, we're starting to see this dynamic changing. The United States wants to get into back into the game of production, and China, who is faced with pressure from tariffs, they're starting to talk about reorienting their economy towards consumption. So they're kind of copying each other's homework to some degree. So if we look at the Make America Great Again program, little bit uncomfortable. Here in Australia, we prefer free trade. We tend to prosper during periods of trade liberalisation. That's true throughout history. But that doesn't mean that it's all bad news. So there's actually some potential pros to what we're seeing happening with international trade. One is that we've got a lower Australian dollar all of a sudden, so that lifts our export competitiveness. Unfortunately, it makes our imports more expensive, but that potentially gives a boost to local industry. So you might start to see some substitution for locally produced goods where those industries exist. Perhaps US agri-products could be substituted for Australian products in certain markets. So China's already retaliated against the US imposing 20% tariffs on China by imposing tariffs on cotton. I would suspect that we'll see more retaliation from China and maybe further retaliation from other trade partners that the United States is putting tariffs on as well. So that might present some opportunities for Australia to capture increased market share by selling into some of these markets that are facing trade pressures from the United States. Now, if other countries retaliate to US tariffs and they put in place tariffs on the United States or other trade barriers, Canada has done this recently, and it threatens to spark a bit of a tit for tat. So what happened in Canada, the United States put in place a tariff on steel and aluminium of 25%. Canada then put in place an export tariff on electricity. They send electricity into the United States. And Donald Trump threatened to double the tariff on aluminium. So you see this kind of tit for tat happening. And where that occurs, we can potentially step in and sell more to both the Americans and to whoever's having the trade fight with them. So Australia's policy response so far has been to stand back, don't participate in the trade war, and tariffs operate in a relative sense. So if country A imposes tariffs on country B and country B imposes tariffs on country A, country C can be the beneficiary by not having these tariffs imposed on either. Now, another potential benefit that we might see here is disinflation in some goods that we import. So China, their economic model is to subsidise production, make lots of stuff, sell it to the United States. All of a sudden, that's become more difficult because the United States is putting in place tariffs on Chinese goods, so they can't sell as much to the USA. Those goods need to find a new home. Maybe they get dumped into some other markets at low prices. So maybe we might see some cheap chemical, cheap fertiliser, cheap machinery at some point coming out of China. That might be a potential benefit for us here in Australia. And also, places like Europe and Britain facing pressures from Russia, worried about the Americans not being there to underwrite their security. All of a sudden, they might be a little bit more amenable to deals. They're facing trade pressures, they're facing security pressures. We have a free trade agreement with the UK. We do not have a free trade agreement with the EU. Maybe they're in a slightly weaker bargaining position all of a sudden, and we can press a little bit harder on getting access to some of these markets. And the last potential pro, we've already touched on this a little bit, is China responds by stimulating their own economy and maybe starting to shift the way that their economy is composed. We've seen signs of this in recent days. China talking about wanting to shift to a more consumption-based economy and also spending more money, lowering interest rates, running bigger government deficits in order to stimulate activity in the Chinese economy. So that's something that we are already seeing. So that potentially might be beneficial for Australian producers. Now, a headwind that we potentially face from US tariffs is that countries that run large trade surpluses with the USA are going to have tariffs imposed on them. And two countries that do that are Vietnam and Indonesia. So it's very likely that on April 2nd, when Donald Trump announces his reciprocal and sectoral tariffs, so mark that date in your diary, that's an important one, April 2nd, Indonesia and Vietnam are likely to face some tariffs from the USA. So that will slow down economic growth in both of these countries to some degree. But having said that, Southeast Asia is the fastest growing economic region in the world. Indonesia is growing at 5.1% per annum. Vietnam is growing at about 6% per annum. So these countries are still experiencing very, very rapid economic growth, and that's great news for our industry. Now, just continuing my aviation metaphor that you might have noticed throughout the slide deck, but international turbulence, it increases the risk of a hard landing. So we've spoken about the state of the Australian economy. The challenge has been getting inflation back under control and doing it without causing a recession. All of a sudden, when you've got these uncertainties in the external environment, you've got these trade issues, it increases the turbulence as you're trying to bring the aircraft into land. And all of a sudden, that raises the risk that the soft landing that we've been aiming for might be a little bit more difficult to stick. So animal spirits, or what an economist calls animal spirits, are important. If businesses lose confidence, they're less likely to invest, and that's bad for economic growth. If consumers lose confidence, if they're worried about the future, they're going to close their wallets. They're not going to spend, and that's bad for the economy. So the economy tends to be as good as you believe that it's going to be. So consumer confidence, business confidence, investment is really important. So we want to make sure that people are feeling good about the state of the world. Now, as I mentioned before, one thing that's in our favour is that the Aussie dollar is a bit of an economic shock absorber for us. We've got a free-floating currency in this country, and when we face external challenges, the value of the dollar tends to drop. So we've seen that since September, just prior to the US election, the Aussie dollar was trading at around about 69 US cents. It's dropped down to around about 63 US cents last time I looked at it. So it's already fallen to increase our export competitiveness, but the flip side of that is that when that happens, our imports become a little bit more expensive. So we might pay a bit more for chemical or fertiliser or diesel, the sorts of things that primary producers in Australia use. So it helps the economy, it supports the economy when the exchange rate adjusts. We're expecting that the Aussie dollar will dip down to around about 61 cents by around about mid-year, and then finish the year at about 62 US cents. Now, the United States, they're shifting their focus to production. In order to do that, they've got this Fortress USA mentality. We're going to build a wall and we're going to stick a factory behind it. And they're looking to have a more protectionist trade model by putting in place tariffs on all of their trading partners. So something that's coming on April 2nd is reciprocal tariffs. So this is the idea that whatever trade restrictions any other country places on the United States will come up with a number that is relevant to those trade restrictions, and they will impose tariffs on each country according to how difficult it is for the US to access their market. So here in Australia, we have a free trade agreement with the United States. We don't levy tariffs on anything that the United States tries to sell to us here in Australia. So we have one of the lowest tariff rates of any country in the world. You can see that on my graph there, actually lower than the United States. So Aussie tariff barriers aren't really a thing. This is not something for the Americans to be upset with us about. What is a thing, especially from the perspective of the USA, is non-tariff barriers. So non-tariff restrictions to trade, and we've heard a bit about this already earlier today, but this is going to be the big topic of conversation in the months ahead. So we already have duty-free access for US goods, but we have some non-tariff barriers. The United States considers the GST to be a non-tariff barrier, but our GST is comparatively low. We've never quite gotten around to increasing the GST. All of a sudden that might be a good thing. And fresh food is exempt. So maybe the United States doesn't apply tariffs to fresh food products from Australia. However, we do restrict US imports of beef due to BSE. We restrict imports of pork, poultry products, pears, apples. We have restrictions on medications, pharmaceuticals. We have restrictions on streaming platforms, and we have other trade barriers that the United States is upset about. So all of this will be topics of conversation when Don Farrell and Anthony Albanese are meeting with their American counterparts. All of this will be on the table. Now, just to finish up, something I want to leave you with is this is all uncomfortable. It's not what we're used to. Over the last 30, 35 years, the trading environment has looked very different to what it's likely to look like in the years ahead. But what I would point out is that periods of free trade are actually the exception rather than the rule. We've only really had 2 periods of globalisation in our history, immediately prior to World War I and following the end of the Cold War up until now. So for most of our history, we've actually traded under protectionism with high tariff barriers, and we've managed to prosper through those times. And we've faced much larger trade shocks in the past than what we face now from the United States. And one of them that I would point out is when Britain joined the EEC, the precursor to the European Union in 1973. At the time, Britain was our most important export market, and all of a sudden, they're trading under European rules. So we lost access to our most important export market for lots of different things that we produced and exported almost overnight. So that was a huge trade shock for the Australian economy, much bigger than we face now. And it did sting at the time, but we recovered very quickly. We found new markets, we adapted, we had innovation, and we prospered following that. So I just want to leave you with that, and I'll finish up there. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.